Okay, we're on. We're live. Hello. So,
Hello.
greetings to Phrenomythic. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Yeah, you made it
You
up.
probably have more. You may have more issues with my actual name.
Uh-oh.
Although it's not actually that hard. My real name is Fedor.
Okay.
Fedor Steeman.
I can handle Fedor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, welcome to anybody else who's out there listening. We got 7 viewers. Okay. We'll build up over time. Anyway, what prompted all this is Fedor put up a video about aliens and body plans. And as a developmental biologist, I have a lot of interest in body plans. So that prompted me to invite him on, and we'll talk about this stuff. As a weird developmental biologist, though, of course, that means that first I'm going to give you a whole bunch of abstract, theoretical, academic sorts of stuff, because that's the way my brain works. Forgive me, everyone, but we'll make it happen. And then Fedor will come in with the exciting, fun stuff. I think that's a fair division of labor here. Okay, so let me first switch into let's see, screen share, find this thing. Where is it? Oh yeah, okay, there we go. So,
okay.
First thing I want to talk about is these bogus dichotomies that I run into all the time. You see, I'm going to start by clarifying the cosmic forces underlying the purpose of this discussion. So we're getting grand right now. And I want to emphasize the plural of that word I just used, forces. We're talking about forces because that's what matters here. There's this multiplicity of elements shaping biology. And unfortunately, there are always people who want to reduce it all to just one thing. And they do that by setting up these dichotomies, basically false dichotomies that we're supposed to choose between. So to give you one example, an obvious example to start with is that whole nature versus nurture debate, which is basically about the relative role of genetics, your nature, versus environmental factors. But I think at its heart, it's really about simple versus complex. Some people don't like multifactorial explanations. So on one side, you have people who argue that you are your genes and maybe environment plays some minor modulatory role. And they tend to call the other side blank slaters, accusing them of thinking the environment does everything. Meanwhile, the so-called blank slaters aren't arguing that at all. They're saying genetics and environment are inseparable co-conspirators in everything. So whenever you hear somebody use that phrase blank slate about anyone or blank slaters, you know they're a hack and they're full of it. And it's weird because the people who say genes and environment are interacting cooperators in phenomena like development and evolution are entirely correct. Yes, I'm saying it. I'm right. They're wrong. Can I say we, have one in a route. And people who use phrases like blank slate or nature versus nurture are actually hacks who are about 100 behind the time. Yet these phrases and arguments persist and are painfully popular because they are gross oversimplifications that conceal the real complexity. One thing we can know for sure is that simplistic explanations are incredibly popular. So, another contemporary debate is between adaptationism and structuralism, and this one might be more obscure to a lot of the general public, but it has many of the same properties. Adaptationists are people who subscribe to a very narrow interpretation of how evolution works. It's all chance variation winnowed by one main causal force, natural selection. It's a successful strategy for science. I will admit this because, as we all know, reductionism is a powerful tool. And formulating hypotheses by focusing on one element at a time is smart and productive. It also means you get to accuse anyone testing other contributing factors as anti-adaptation and therefore anti-evolution, which gets old and annoying really, really fast. That other side, which I favor, isn't anti-adaptation at all. Selection is an important and powerful force, but there are things it does not explain, and pointing that out raises a great deal of ire, and we get immediately accused of ignoring genes and fitness and selection and all those other tools of population genetics when it's not true. Okay, now, there are extremists, so I will admit there are some old school structuralists who are anti-genetics, like Darcy Thompson and Brian Goodwin, but they're both dead now and not at all representative. A lot of the focus of that anti-structuralist sentiment right now has been aimed at Stephen Jay Gould, who also was not anti-genetics or anti-selection, but he was a great big fat SJW, so of course he's easy to hate by some people. Okay, so for an example, I'm going to give you an example of some of this anti-structuralist sentiment. It's an old paper by Sherman and Reeves from 1993, which actually has a lot to commend it. I kind of, in some ways, really like this paper because it's very good at demanding clarity and strong definitions of phenomena. And I like that part. It's a paper that's amazingly resentful of Stephen Gould, though, and hates spandrels and the concept of adaptation, and basically treats every word from his typewriter as anathema. But here's the definition of adaptation from Sherman and Reeves, and it's just fine. I'm perfectly happy with this idea. It's that an adaptation is a phenotypic variant that results in the highest fitness among a specified set of variants in a given environment. Now, one of the things Sherman and Reeve complain about is some of the undefinables in Gould's formulations. And I would say that some of these terms are also kind of vague and difficult to define. Measuring fitness is sometimes kind of circular, but okay. There's a good understanding of what that means. Okay, this is very much an operational definition. Its virtue, as Sherman and Reeves say, is that you can make specific predictions about how populations will change over time using this definition, and that's great. I agree completely with that. But along the way, they also mention what has to be excluded from their definition, and that includes any historical component at all. And that bugs me. When they're dissecting various definitions of adaptations, they actually treat the fact that a definition might take into account the history of an organism as a strike against it. Okay, it means large classes of phenomena are going to be totally invisible to this particular definition. I also kind of like this phrase they used. This is most charming. They say, okay, ancestral species do not otherwise mysteriously reach from the past to clutch the throats of their descendants as part of the process of denying the importance of history in evolution. And it's weird. This is a view that disregards entirely the role of the past in shaping species. And I would assert that, yeah, your ancestors do reach from the past to clutch you and define the potentials that you have in your body. And that brings me to the structuralist perspective. Structuralists believe that the inherited characters of our ancestors are a significant factor in both constraining adaptation and providing useful potential for adaptation. You cannot explain evolution without including the factors that are the raw material for evolution and that shape how evolution can proceed. So for instance, let's look at limbs. Limbs are incredibly useful and can be a powerful adaptive element. Yet when you look at this diagram, our distant ancestor, the chordates up there in the top left, lacked all limbs. They're not part of the ancestral body plan. That we have limbs now, that tetrapods have limbs, is actually an evolutionary innovation added to the chordate body plan. And yet when you look at something like an arthropod, that's the bottom left, you see that they just got limbs all over the place. They're just hairy with limbs growing out in every segment. That's kind of useful for them. And if you look at something like an annelid up there on the top right, you can see that, okay, yeah, they're a tube and they lack limbs as well. And they have not secondarily evolved twin limbs as tetrapods have. They just have those interesting hairs all over the place that are an important adaptation for them. Okay, so you can't understand our evolution without recognizing that chordates spent a few 100 million years tweaking fin folds to get at paltry 4 limbs, while arthropods were blithely modifying their plethora of limbs to make locomotor widgets and respiratory structures and mouthparts for feeding and even copulatory apparatuses. A purely immediate pop gen definition of evolution doesn't explain the phenomena we're talking about today, which is the body plan. So what is a body plan? It's a shared set of features common to a group of organisms. And that's the important thing. We're not invoking group selection here. That would be bad. Well, at least I think that would be bad. What we're saying is that instead there's this inherited set of traits that you have because your ancestors had them. So a body plan is a group of structural and developmental characteristics that can be used to identify a group of animals, such as a phylum. All members of a particular group share the same body plan at some point during their development in the embryonic, larval, or adult stage. So that's an important fact of evolutionary history. It isn't accounted for by that Sherman and Reeves definition at all. Okay, in the case of chordate or arthropod body plans, these are features that have persisted for hundreds of millions of years in billions of species, and this definition is terribly inadequate to explain it. It essentially succeeds by simplifying organisms to a single or small number of traits and ignoring any causal explanation for why people and fish or beetles and flies have the same body plan. So, how does an explanation based entirely around selection as a causal force explain the commonalities of the vertebrate limb? You see, look at this. You can feel it on yourself. Feel your upper arm, and there's one bone. And then below that, there are 2 bones, which are sometimes fused in sometimes species. In some species, these are always modified. And then there's this collection of small, complex articulating bones in your wrist. And then there are these radiating digits emanating from that. That's kind of a core plan for a vertebrate limb. And it's true all over the place. This is a common figure used in explaining homology, but so we've got all these different functions. That basic architecture has been repurposed in multiple ways for multiple roles, whether it's for flying or climbing or running or digging or swimming, anything like that. It's all been changed over and over again, but we keep that same central arrangement. Why? And a good structuralist would tell you that, well, this alone should tell you that developmental and historical constraints are real phenomena that need explaining. And we do have a couple of ways of explaining it. One is the idea of a global positional information that is relatively refractory to change and is expressed at a specific time in development, called the Phylotypic stage. So this is a diagram from Raff in 1996, where he illustrates the developmental hourglass. And what it is there's diverse strategies to arrive at this point in development, but all of us converge on this particular pattern, and then we radiate from that point on to adulthood. So there is a phylotypic stage where we start making limb buds. Those limb buds are following a particular plan of development. That's the same whether you're a dolphin or a bird or a person. But then you go into these, what he calls von Barrian developmental trajectories afterwards, where they diverge into a wing or a flipper or a hand. So the key thing is that phylotypic stage, and the question is, why do we conserve that? Why does that persist? And Raff's explanation is that that is the stage at which we set up global information. That we got this little bitty worm-like embryo, and at this time, genes are switched on that specify this is the head end, this is the tail end, this is the middle. And all that has to be done as a preliminary before you can start diversifying into these different structures. Another elaboration of this story comes from Gunther Wagner, who argues that there are layers of genes. And this might be an idea comfortable to you computer scientists out there who work with network layers, for instance, and that there's a layer of positional information. So we set up these simple gradients of positional information that say this is the front, this is the back, and this is something in between, or this is the dorsal, this is ventral, and here's a position in between. So that's the positional information layer. And that is then read by another layer that Wagner has christened the character identity network. These are genes that read positional information and set up patterns of activity that are appropriate to that region. So for instance, there might be a network of genes in the head end that respond to the positional information to initiate the construction of a head. There might be those in the middle that set up the thorax, and those at the other end which set up the abdomen. So this character identity network is the reservoir of homology here, that we have a similar character identity network to all the other vertebrates, and it also shares some relationships to those in invertebrates, and that this is the source of novelty that we can have, for instance, features that generate brand new character identity networks and create whole new patterns of development. One example would be, for instance, the vertebrate head. Our ancestral chordate did not really have a head, and they acquired a character identity network. Again, a set of genes, probably adapted from other genes, that then established the identity of that anterior structure. And then there's another layer he calls the realizer genes. Those are the ones that are specified by the character identity network to make the specific structure that belongs at that position. So an example there would be in flies. You've got the wings, and you've also got this haltere structure that develops in the posterior most part of the thorax. Those are homologous structures. They use a similar character identity network, but they express different realizer genes, so that one makes a wing in the mid-thorax, and the one at the posterior thorax makes this little cuticular gyroscope. Okay, now when you look at this diagram, one thing I have to point out that Wagner is quite clear about is that it's a mistake to look at this as a hierarchy of genes. He repeats that point multiple times, that it's actually a cooperative network of interdependent genes. And that's another flaw we sometimes run across, is people trying to impose a hierarchy on something where all the layers are all talking to one another in interesting and complicated ways to generate the structures associated with them. Okay, I have babbled long enough. I think I'll turn it over to Phrenomythic at this point. So we're going to talk about speculating about alien morphology. And here's the deal. There's this bias to think in adaptationist functionalist ways. Aliens must have limbs that sort of resemble ours because they're so dang useful, right? These arms and legs are so useful. So all the aliens must have something just like that. But the reason we have these kinds of limbs are because our ancestors had them, and they were subsequently tweaked in significant ways. But the core is a product of our ancestry. And aliens obviously would have a completely different ancestry right from the very beginning. Adaptationist logic would provide the necessity for each stage in their evolution, but the raw material would be completely different. And there would be no correspondence in the genetic circuitry of any of these layers. And who knows, they may not even use the same kinds of layers. Okay. There, I've bored everyone to tears. They always sleep. So now it's your job to wake them up.
All right. Well, you were actually hitting the nail on the head, because this is one of the next topics of the next video in this series of alien analysis I wanted to make. And was originally, when I was thinking about, I've been wanting to do a series like that for a long time. Wanted to do something about alien evolution. I've got a background in biology, specifically in paleobiology, evolution and systematics. And well, that's like 25 years ago. I've been working in all kinds of odd jobs in the meanwhile, but kind of as a hobby, I wanted to revive my biology background. So I've been thinking about, I've always been fascinated about how could life evolve on other planets, because I will probably never live to see it anyway. None of us may ever. We may not even get out to other planets at all, because the distances are just enormous. But certainly not in my own lifetime. So all I can do is speculate. And the more I think about it, the harder I think it becomes to actually get a good idea. Because my original idea was that I just wanted to make a survey of Earth's biological diversity, and then say, okay, well, how many times do we see this kind of adaptation or this kind of feature, and then kind of get some kind of infer the likelihood of these things evolving somewhere else. But the more you look at it, the more you realize that a lot of these things have really, really deep histories. Things like eyes, even a lot of the precursors, proteins involved in eyes. You already have those in protists and everything. And if you look at bilaterians, they already have some kind of anlage, some kind of primitive primordial, how do you call that? Beginnings of some kind of functional eye. It can be really primitive, but so then you really start to think, well, is this really convergent evolution, or is it as you might call parallel evolution? Because you already have an eye in the ancestor. So even though you've got all these kinds of different manifestations of eyes, there's still variations on the original innovation of detecting light. So when you think about life that is completely independent of life on Earth, that has evolved, it has its own abiogenesis, and it has evolved along its own biochemistry, molecular biology. All these things could be radically different, or they could be very similar. We don't even know that. As I mentioned in one of my videos, there might only be a very limited set of molecules that is useful enough for life, or it could be, there could be a whole sea of proteins. We have not mapped out the entire protein space of possibilities to know these kind of things. We're just speculating. So the more I think about it, the more impossible this whole endeavor I've undertaken becomes, because all these even the bilateral body plan, as far as we can see, it is only originated once. We don't have parallel, well, we do have some examples of bilateral symmetry, but it's very limited. The bilateral symmetry we see in all the bilaterians, that is all the creatures from flatworms or to humans. Not to imply some kind of ladder, but yeah, you get the point. That seems to have originated for at least for flatworms and humans. That is just derived from a single point.
Yeah, they're all using the same molecular signals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we know it will be invented somewhere else? I kind of speculate that, well, since it's so successful, so we got this enormous radiation of different life forms. If it happens on another planet, some course in their evolution, and you'll get the same phenomenon of diversification, that makes it likely that it might occur. But for all we know, we might have planets where they never go beyond the Cnidarian phase, or we never go beyond the sponge phase, or maybe never go beyond the protist phase, because
Yeah.
It just never, the innovation is never discovered in the evolutionary history.
Right. Well,
So,
I like to use the example of plants though, because
oh yeah,
we animals, we take the animal pattern of organization for granted, which is that in the early embryo, we got this mass of fairly fluid cells that can migrate around and can set up their positional information, can read each other's neighbors and move to new places. And in plants, you don't have that. They have those rigid cell walls that prevent cell migration. So instead, you get this sort of sequential pattern of development where what's going on in a limb bud where it's branching is very different than what's going on in the stem. And what it does at the bud is it sets up two new branches that then have their own patterns at the end. So you get this kind of interesting sequential information. Who's to say that you couldn't have an alien organism that completely abandons our structured pattern of setting up positional information and develops in a whole new way, like a plant, for instance?
yeah, exactly. You could have,
Yeah.
like in plants, you get modular growth.
Yeah.
Actually, when you think about the growth in in animals, or actually metazoans to be more precise, except sponges. It's I like to compare to Haribo gummy bear growth. You got this little, those gummy bears. You can put it in water, and then it starts to soak up water, and starts to grow, but it retains the same shape. So
Yeah. Well,
that is actually quite interesting.
except we got animals that metamorphose, which
That is also true. Yeah.
yeah. So there's a million. What about an alien species that undergoes a metamorphosis and does a radical reorganization of all of its tissues?
Yeah. What if there's some kind of diversification that has, what you say, as at its basis? You got a creature that cannot really grow and then has to metamorphosize to I don't know, into some different form so that it can grow a little bigger, or maybe in some using modules or who knows what. And that may be their pendant to bilaterians, just not being bilateral. It's
Yeah.
it's frustrating actually to think about, because we have nothing to go after. If we knew one planet with life, then we could see, okay, well, apparently bilaterians will always evolve because we see it on the other planet, but
Or they don't.
or they don't. We have nothing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it's still intriguing to speculate about.
Yeah, but I would argue though that even if we do find bilaterian organization on another planet, everything else will be so different
Yeah,
that you can't really make comparisons of homology between us and the weird torpedo-shaped creatures of Alpha Centauri. By this kind of thing though, where it doesn't matter what we find, we're going to be interested. Even if we don't find life on another planet, human beings, at least the biologists among us, will be extremely excited and be anxious to pursue what's going on there. I would say, even if we just find, an equivalent of prokaryotic bacteria, man, I want to know what molecules are there.
Yeah.
What's driving their metabolism? I would expect it wouldn't be the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because another interesting thought is there are so many life forms that we could never have thought of ourselves, in our wildest fantasies. You've got so many weird creatures that most people have never even heard of, echinoid worms, or even the ones that people do know, they're like echinoderms. They're actually really strange because they're descended from bilaterians. There used to be bilateral symmetrical, so we could presume, and then they gave it all up for being radial again. I mean, why? Well, yeah, they probably went to a sessile phase, and then they decided, okay, well, that's good enough with being sessile. Now we're going to move around again. So cestos, and they're going to develop tiny little feet, like thousands of small feet. That they're laughing at the arthropods because the arthropods, they think they got a lot of feet.
Oh, right, yeah.
We got even more feet. So who would have thought of that? So
Well, part of the problem
I-
here is nobody
yeah,
thinks of these things. This is not the
yeah,
product of rational design. This is the
no,
product of chance and all kinds of accidents, and just exploit, natural selection, exploiting the accidents to generate these things.
yeah, and it's fascinating to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to deal with some questions? We got questions
Oh yeah,
piling up here.
questions. We've been ignoring.
Yeah. Let's see. One question from Neslig is the phylotypic stage different when you look at different levels, like comparing all chordates? The pharyngula is the typic stage. But when you look at only tetrapods, a different. Oh wait, no, I think they are all. If you just look at chordates, there's this broad period that corresponds to the phylotypic stage. It's just that when you look at tetrapods, they've added a novelty, limbs, to that particular stage. The phylotypic stage, I would emphasize, is not rigid. It's constrained by history, but it's got some flexibility, and we can add novel features to even the phylotypic stage. That's one of the mistakes Haeckel made, was thinking you only acquired novelties at the end of development. But yeah, they can happen all over the place. Okay, another question. If there are intelligent life forms out there, what would we expect to have in common? A brain-like organ would be one necessary requirement, but there are others. Oh, okay. What do we need to be intelligent organisms?
Well, think of echinoderms. They don't have a centralized brain, and you could
They're
actually
not very
found
intelligent.
they're not very intelligent. But I found a very interesting concept alien on DeviantArt. They're called the amphorans. I can send a link, but I'm not sure if we can show it without getting into copyright issues.
Yeah.
But I could post it in the chat perhaps.
Yeah.
And there's a very interesting concept, because it has a triradial or trilateral. I'm not sure what the right term is, but let's say triradial symmetry, like a simplified echinoderm, which has 5 sides. This one has 3 sides, and then it's got the mouth and on the belly side, and it's got the eyes, and it's like shaped like a pillar, and the eyes are sticking out like what do you call it, on stalks. They're sticking out on the top of the head, and then they've got 3 legs on each side, and then 3 arms in between. They're kind of arthropod-like legs and arms. And and the idea is that they can just decide which way to go. They don't have a definite front side. So whatever they feel like, okay, today I'm going to walk that direction. I'm going to use that side to walk. So will those have a centralized brain, I wonder? Or will they have 3 nodes for each side?
Yeah, I mean, just from examples on this planet, I would say that we've got several alternatives to the brain. One is to just this ganglionic kind of organization. I think I tend to agree that you're not going to have just a diffuse nerve net, that you need localized, specialized connections in order to build a complex thinking structure. But it doesn't all have to be one brain. It could be multiple brains. We'll use my favorite example of the octopus, which has a highly distributed nervous system. All that stuff about limb function, that's all distributed out into the arms. So the octopus, so the octopus doesn't have to consciously think about everything. And I would say the same thing is true for us. Try this. Go out for a walk on a nice sunny day and listen to a podcast on your earbuds. And if you're really brave, you can even read a book as you're walking along, or have a conversation with somebody else. We have these very distributed functions in our brains. So which one of those is you, right? And I think there's lots of organisms that tend to, including us, that tend to distribute functions all over the place.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what else we got. I have a provocative statement that I'll then qualify from Cryptdyke. Everyone's home sun will tend to be yellow-green.
Well, I have a video speculating on life on a red dwarf planet, and there's a lot of challenges to that.
Yeah.
But it's true. Our sun is in the green. There, it should be called a green star because its light is slightly in the green spectrum of light, or it's speaking in the green.
Yeah.
And that is also why there's one theory that all planets are green just because the sun is peaking right there. And the reason for that would be to, because there's surplus light,
Oh, right.
and then they can bounce it off, and then it will go deeper into the plant layers. So they get stacked there, photosynthetic cells, which I think is a very, very interesting theory in any case.
Yeah.
Makes a lot
But
of
just the
sense.
idea that there's a surplus of light on this planet suggests that something like on a red dwarf,
Yeah.
it's going to have less energy, but maybe it's enough to get life started.
Yeah. I speculated in one video at least, and it's not that deeply researched. Just kind of skim what I can find on the internet, but I speculate that it may be black. At least that's one of the proposals I heard, that plant life will be black, at least to our eyes.
Yeah.
Because you have to take that into account too. There might be reflecting light in wavelengths that we cannot even see. But,
Okay.
but because there's so little light on a red dwarf planet that they're going to have to soak in as much as they can at all.
All right. We got to follow up that. A prediction that light-sensitive molecules will be most useful when they are near the peak available radiation wavelength. I would sort of agree, except there's limitations that certain energies of radiation it's going to be really difficult to get a light-sensitive molecule that isn't going to respond by total destruction. So, yeah, are our eyes tuned to the most high energy, most available sorts of lights? And I'd say no, they're not. They're kind of off peak, because there we can have simple molecules that aren't demolished by the incoming radiation, and it can be swiftly regenerated to a responsive state. So I think that would be a problem with. So I sort of agree, but I'd also say there's probably a window that's defined by chemistry that's going to restrict that.
Yeah, there is something special about visible light, because as you also mentioned, that if it goes too far into the ultraviolet range, it becomes the wavelengths become too destructive, and if you go into the infrared, it just becomes more heat radiation than anything useful, and a lot of if it's like an Earth-like atmosphere, a lot of wavelengths are actually deflected. So the visible light is actually in that part of the spectrum that is it just goes straight through the atmosphere,
right?
Basically.
Yes, so it's also affected by geophysical properties. So lots of constraints on what we can respond to. Okay, another comment here. Sometimes I imagine that alien fish are not bilaterally symmetrical, but are radial symmetrical, and that rotate like a propeller instead of flexing the body to swim. That's an interesting idea that I think one of the things that is an example of historical constraint is bilateral symmetry, and there are organisms that are not bilaterally symmetric. There was a worm discovered, I think it was discovered in some Scottish mudflats, 10, 15 years ago. It's a completely new phylum, and it's spiral shaped. It's got a spiral shaped internal structure, and it actually does corkscrew through the medium. So you can imagine if that had been our ancestor, this spirally shaped worm, we would all be corkscrew shaped right now and springing around somehow.
Yes, that dendrogramma perhaps.
Maybe I don't. Yeah, I'd have to look it up. I can't remember the name right now.
But maybe a more mundane example would be ctenophores or jelly.
Right.
What do you call those? Comb jellies. Yeah. Sea grapes. They are biradial. They've got biradial symmetry. So they're not bilateral strictly, but they do have as opposed to cnidarians like jellyfish, they do have two openings. They got a mouth opening and an anal opening.
Yeah.
And they don't. Well, I think some species they got these huge gaping mouths they can trap or engulf other creatures with.
Yeah.
But they're still not bilateral, strictly speaking. They're biradial, as far as I know.
Yeah. So aren't we all grateful that our ancestor had a mouth and an anus and a central tube? Because the alternative is terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah. Although, some things we may actually expect if there is if bilateral symmetry is universal, we'll probably see things like worms, because that's a very basic thing. It's food goes in one end and then goes out again the other end. That's it's pretty basic.
Yeah, but it's so inefficient. Now we need two openings.
Yeah.
Let's simplify. Okay, yeah. Let's see. Why do you suppose humans are the only species? No, it's species. Species is a kind of coin. Why are they the only species that often consciously wants to end its existence on Earth?
Or is it?
I don't know if that's true. If you think about it, there are humans who are in miserable, awful conditions who still persevere and endeavor to live. So that's kind of the counterpoint to that. And if you put mice in miserable conditions, overpopulated and dense and terrible, you see the mouse equivalent of crime erupt, and you see all kinds of pathological behaviors emerge. You could argue that that's the mouse death wish.
Mm-hmm.
So
we're getting pretty dark again.
Yeah.
Territory.
Yeah. What a terrible question to ask.
Yeah. Shame on you.
Yeah. We're only accepting optimistic questions. Let's see. Another one. What do you think about Dr. Keith L. Moore?
Who's that?
You may not know him. Keith Moore is a famous embryologist. He wrote this major textbook in embryology. He's really a big name in medical embryology, and he once upon a time made a trip to Saudi Arabia, I think it was, at the behest of the Muslims there, and he's the guy who basically said, "Oh yeah, Muhammad did such a good job of," and he is full of bold leap. Okay, smart guy. He knows his stuff. He's a good embryologist. And I've used his textbooks in some of my classes, so they're classics in the field. So that's the good thing. But I think it's another example of how you can be so coerced by the needs for civility and diplomacy that you might say something that's actually antithetical to what you really believe. And I think that's kind of the case that happened here. That he got wined and dined, and then he was gracious and made some nice comments. And now it's become this thing where Muslims say, "Oh, he proved that Muhammad was a prophet," and no, he didn't. He got things wrong.
Yeah, I can still remember you were confronted. I think it was in Scotland or
in Ireland. Yeah,
Ireland.
Yeah.
They were not even aware that you were an embryologist yourself.
No.
That was a great moment. Are you an embryologist or what? Yes.
Yeah, and those guys still occasionally send me invitations to come debate. No, I'm not gonna. It's a tiny little quote from the Quran. It's just this little bitty thing where it just briefly says a few things about different stages in development. They're very vague. You go through a leech-like stage. That's not science, and it's not very useful.
No, I've gotten tired of debating creationists. Done that.
Yeah.
Late 90s to somewhere mid noughties.
Yeah, I was in a creationist debate a couple of years ago, and it was kind of my last one. And then I said, "All right, I'm not going to do this anymore. here's my list of requirements, and here's this big chunk of money you have to give me in order to get me to do it. So I'm willing to sell out those principles for a certain amount, but otherwise it's a huge waste of time. Okay, let's see. I've read some other reasons why red dwarf solar systems wouldn't be a good place for life. Excess infrared, yeah, major flares. Right.
Yeah, major flares, you know. I made a video, not to...
yes, you can plug your videos. It's just
not
fine.
to plug my videos, but yeah, I made a video on live on Proxima b, and assuming it's a water planet and everything, and the issue of those flares and all of that. So I kind of touch upon those things, but
yeah.
The problem is we don't know. We got all these observations from very, very far away, and then we got some scientific paper saying, well, it's probably the atmosphere is going to be stripped away in any case, but within millions of years, especially in the young stage of the red dwarf star. But until we're actually there and seeing it up close, where it's just I wouldn't say it's educated guesses, but they're still very preliminary. We don't really know until we get really close.
Right.
We ever get to.
Yeah, but another consideration is that right now most of the speculation about the origin of life suggests that it's kind of independent of the sun we have. It's all geothermal, deep ocean stuff going on.
What about rogue planets?
Yeah, what about things like Europa? We might expect that there could be that that's actually the one place where I think we have a chance of discovering alien life in our lifetime, and that's in the oceans of Europa. And the thing is that then it doesn't matter whether you've got a red dwarf or whatever. It's just you've got to have some kind of insulating medium surrounding you, and you've got to have an internal source of energy, because life will find a way. It will exploit chemical energy as well as solar energy. So we could have been.
I also have some very naive and faint hope for life on Jupiter, but that's all because of Carl Sagan with these balloon life forms. Very fascinating.
Yeah,
And
that's a good example too, that we have a whole set of prior expectations of what life is like, and we know earthly chemistry. And you go to a place like Jupiter, you've got a completely different basis for the chemical reactions that would occur, and you could get completely different life. Same with Europa, although I kind of expect with Europa, it's water, it's using Europa thermal energy, tidal energy, things like that. So you could imagine that there's similar conditions there to early life on Earth. The question would be, is there something that would then limit the evolution of that life so that you wouldn't get, for instance, multicellularity?
Yeah, there's actually a question about that. Someone is mentioning these single-celled organisms that have huge, complex macroscopic structures.
Oh, acetabularia. Yeah.
And that is also the thing, because we only have the kind of life that we're used to, but do we even need multicellularity? Do we need anything? Do we need tissues? We got all these cells kind of forming a layer because of they're stick together sideways,
right?
So they can have these nice little vesicles and cavities and everything to have fun with. But
yes, when I was
necessary.
When I was talking at the beginning, I mentioned Brian Goodwin and Darcy Thompson, and I should have mentioned that I really admire those guys. I think they have done some exciting, interesting work from a different perspective, and I appreciate that. I think they're missing a big part of the picture too, but I think the strict geneticists are also missing a big part of the picture. But Brian Goodwin is the guy who made a big deal about acetabularia. Acetabularia is a really cool organism. It's single-celled, and it forms this stalk with a kind of ribbed umbrella shape coming off of it. And how does it do that? It's not a multicellular organism. It's not like you got specialized cells that are making the stalk and specialized cells making the umbrella or the sporing body or whatever. It's just one organism, one cell that's pumping proteins in very specific patterns. And That's a good point. I mean, that's where I think Brian Goodwin actually had some important things to say, that it's too bad they got so heavily ignored by some of his excesses, but still,
Yeah.
yeah.
But they do have nuclei, multiple nuclei.
Right. Yeah,
Of course.
a lot
Believe
of
that.
a
Yeah.
lot of protists and single-celled organisms do it that way, by having specialized nuclei that they spread around in the organism. So you can imagine that there's another example of how, alien life could set up pattern formation and make complex forms, yet be single-celled to some degree.
Yeah. But even the eukaryotic cell, that we have, with all these cellular organelles and how would cells develop on other planets? It's completely disconnected from ours. Will they become like modular cells, or would they have an entirely different?
Right.
On the
Okay,
other
so
hand, yeah.
I was going to say, Nestle brings up a point. I'm convinced that life won't form on a gas giant, since complex chemistry requires compounds being suspended in a solvent, and gas won't do, and neither would solid.
That's true, but you can.
That on Jupiter there's a layer, an interface layer, that's kind of slushy and kind of wet. It's got different compounds in it. Who knows what's going on there? So
I can imagine. I can imagine small droplets in suspension.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have.
Or I can
solvents.
imagine the life getting a start in this semi-liquid layer, and then evolving to form the gas balloons that Carl Sagan has floating around in the atmosphere. So, I think my point is that Jupiter probably has extremely diverse environments, far more so than we do on Earth. And who knows what's going on up there?
Or on a gas giant in the temperate zone in another solar system.
Okay, we got another weird comment here. You must read from Dr. Zakir Naik. That guy's awful. He's just a dogmatic conservative Muslim. I'm not. Yes, he's a physician. So what? No, that's not a credible source.
Oh, that guy. Oh, he's awful. No.
Yeah.
He's a windbag.
Yeah, he's also one of those people who rants about killing gays, and no. There's a moral dimension to science that he crosses, even while not understanding science. So, okay, presumably there are hard limits to what is possible for alien body plans, but those are determined by physics rather than biology. Maybe.
Well, the physics would also be not different, but the gravity and pressure might be different on other planets, because the oxygen pressure, you might actually have huge arthropods on other planets, because there you got less gravity and you got more oxygen pressure.
Yeah, and I'd agree that physics is going to play a really important role. That you can't ignore physics in this stuff.
No.
But at the same time, I think just biological constraints are important as well. That there are limitations that are imposed by the network of molecules that we have, and I'm sorry that that's also going to shape life as well.
Yeah.
Okay, let's not get distracted by Muslim pseudoscience. How likely do you think alternative chemistries other than carbon chains and water solvent are? Oh yeah, let's watch Star Trek and talk about silicon life and
yeah. I heard that. I'm not a chemist, but because you can have the silicon molecule is actually you have the same amount of bonds you can get, like as with carbon. But I heard that these chains will be much more rigid than carbon chains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
other challenges.
Yeah, that's an example of something that I don't think I can rule out a priori that this is the kind of thing where if we find it, we will be very excited and we'll be blown away. But right now, it's in order to get that kind of chemistry to function, we need to establish a fairly complex, demanding sort of environment that is uncomfortable for us carbon-based life forms to work in. So progress in the experimental side of that's going to be slow.
Yeah. Yeah, the problem is with our kind of life is the only kind of life we know is possible. It's we can we can think about all kinds of different kinds of chemistry and
Yeah,
but we don't know if that's going to work until we find it. Or next time we find life, if it's going to be completely different chemistry, or if it's
yeah,
basically the same thing. Until we do find it, we're still speculating. We think, yeah, it could
right.
be
Nestle makes a good point here, though. He says it doesn't do quite the job as well as carbon, and carbon is more common.
right.
And one other aspect of biology is that the distribution of elements roughly, very roughly, corresponds to their prevalence on the planet. So it's if we had to depend on some really rare element to form the backbone of most of our complex structures, that would be a real limitation. By using carbon, that's not a limiting factor, usually.
Yeah.
Okay. Nell C cannot type today. Okay. Practice, practice. I wouldn't rule out something other than carbon and water, but I doubt we meet that first. Yeah, but that's a selection argument. That's saying that we are most likely to explore environments that are compatible with our form of life. And so that's the kind of life we'll find. But yeah, as mentioned, maybe life on Titan would have exotic chemistry. So we'd have to get really uncomfortable and go diving into places where we cannot live to look for exotic life. And so I kind of agree. We're probably, if we do find life, the first life will probably be like us. So chemically like us, not like us morphologically.
That is also a personal gripe of mine. Whenever there's something in the news that they found a planet or a star where there might be life, there are always this little contingent of people. There's always this little group of people who's gonna complain that, oh, but why restrict yourself to where there can be water? Life can be in all kinds of different forms that doesn't need water, and that is true, but this is what we have to work from. If there's water, we have some kind of certainty that it's possible for life like we know it's to occur, because again we're the only kind of life that we know.
Yeah.
But people
That's a point Cartomancer
yeah.
brings up here. Shouldn't we clarify exactly what we mean by life here? Yeah. How do we define life? Yeah. You've hit on one of the hard problems in biology.
It has to reproduce. It has to have internal metabolism. So viruses are excluded, but then again, should viruses be excluded? It's
this is precisely the question. My cell biology question every year. I ask this. I make a little poll of the students and ask, okay, are viruses alive or not? And it's kind of fun because no matter which way they go, and I can come up with a counter argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've convinced them that I don't believe in anything, but yeah, viruses are an interesting case.
What about prions? Little.
Oh, you're making it harder. Yeah.
They don't even have a shell or anything. They're just molecules floating around, the rogue molecules.
Yeah. Okay. What about crystals? Salt crystals.
Oh,
they
right.
expand. Yeah. Okay.
They grow.
Yeah. Okay, water seems to be a very likely solvent for a number of reasons, one of which is its stability over geological time, facilitate bubble water's unusual phase changes. Yeah, you know,
Water is special.
we can sit here and we could make all kinds of lovely justifications for why the way things are on this planet are the best way, the optimal way, the way they should be everywhere else. And, you know, I agree, those are good points. But, you know, maybe that thing living on Titan has a completely different perspective on it. And once we figure out how to talk to it, it's going to be telling us, no, that's silly. Water's horrible. It's like this horrible dissolving acid that kills everything. So no, I'm not going to go with that. Okay. Giuliano Taverna was taught that viruses are not alive, but I always disagreed with it. At the very least, they are more alive than not. Yeah, again, I could sit here and make counter arguments. They're parasites. They're not alive. They depend on another metabolism. You get the idea. We could go back and forth on that. Let's see. Water's consistency over millennia here made us. Maybe not them. Okay. Please, could you tell us what you think of the recent Curiosity rover findings with interesting chemical molecules? I didn't know what interesting chemical molecules were discovered.
Organic molecules. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Still okay. Not. That's a problem, you know. When people hear organic molecules, they think of life, but you know, you got organic molecules on meteorites and all over the solar system. But still, you know, it could mean because they're in this bed of, you know, where water once, you know, stationary water was once, you know, there are a lot of sediments there, and there's organic compounds in there. So maybe there was life. Maybe there were
but you find great clouds of organic molecules floating in space, clouds of aldehydes, for instance, or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Those are organic compounds. Mm. So, you know, the things I would ask, the common questions that are asked, if you find an organic molecule, the next thing you want to ask is, what about chirality? Because life processes organic molecules in a way that produces an overabundance of one form versus another. Whereas natural processes, you know, non-biological processes tend not to. I bet you they don't have enough information to really know that.
Oh yeah, that would be a test.
Yeah. So if you found a bunch of pyruvate of a specific chirality, then I would be saying, oh boy, I think that's pretty good. That's pretty good evidence for life on Mars.
Well, then the next rover should have some kind of instrument where it can look at chirality. I mean, well, what they're waiting for.
Yeah, or we need to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, with a shovel.
Let's not bring up Elon Musk and all those people.
Oh, forget that. Yeah, no, let's not. No. Okay, Nestle says he thinks there's a high likelihood life was once on Mars, maybe not independently formed, since exchange of rocks between Mars and Earth was common in early history. Yeah, Mars is not the best test case that for independent origin of life. Although, you know, if we went there and we did find evidence of life that was completely different from life on Earth, that again would be really, really, really cool. I'd love to see that. If we go there and we find, you know, like I mentioned, pyruvate chemistry is universal, that doesn't tell me much. You know, that could be something that's just, you know, chemically universal, but not necessarily of the same biological origin. Okay, questions are starting to slow down. Oh, yeah. Chirality. If you make one screw at a time, you probably don't care if they twist left or right. Yeah, if you're making 1 million a day, convenience drives you to make them all the same. Right. Mm-hmm. And if you're making those screws and they have to fit your set of bolts that have the complementary twist, then also becomes really important that they all have the same. And you don't want to make a bunch of right and left-handed screws and a bunch of right and left-handed bolts, because then they're only going to work a quarter of the time, which isn't so good.
I also
Okay.
think Neslik brought up the point of panspermia, called the common sense kind, not the goofy kind of panspermia, where it is not implausible that the rocks being transported between Earth and Mars could have spread life
Yeah.
one place or the other. But yeah.
Yeah, but and in that case, I would think that so there's splashes from meteors hitting the Earth, sending things all over the place. I would suggest that the Earth is probably a more likely source for life than Mars.
Yeah.
Because we're larger and got more water and we're more complex and all that kind of stuff. So that's, yeah, the panspermists wouldn't care much for that.
No.
But it's also highly unlikely that life splashed off of Earth would reach someplace like Titan or Europa and survive and make it there. Now, there has been
Europa. Yeah.
Yeah. There's been some speculation that, okay, sure, this rain of organic compounds from outer space might have contributed to the environment for life to evolve. But when people have done the calculations, it's just a tiny amount of material that's coming down from outer space, relatively speaking. And it's all getting diluted out all over the surface of the planet. It's much more interesting if you have a concentrated source of organic compounds or high energy compounds like you would find in a deep sea vent.
Mm-hmm. What is also a fascinating idea, kind of off topic, but the Venus may have life suspended in the upper layers of its atmosphere, because there the temperatures are actually amenable. So you would basically have kind of a Jupiter-like situation where things are floating. Maybe life once lived there. Now it got scorched on the surface. But maybe it's still because they did measure some kind of unusual activity, light absorption. I don't have the details exactly, but there are some signs that maybe something's going on in the upper atmosphere.
Yes, we need to send a scoop there and take samples and find out. Of course, as we all know, life actually originated on Venus and rose to great complex forms, but then Republicans evolved and they ignored all the warnings about global warming and cooked themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Yes, it's the evolution of Republicans that ends all life on planets.
Getting dark again.
Yeah. I'm in the United States and you're not. So we've got cause to feel really grim and dark and cynical nowadays.
Yeah.
Okay, pretty much all of our imaginings of alien life have been colored by our own concerns, from Lucian of Samosata to Kepler to H.G. Wells. Yeah, let's throw in all the canals on Mars and Schiaparelli and all that. What concerns of the modern age might be coloring our speculations? Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. There's a phenomenon that's been documented in biology where every generation has their metaphor for life that's colored by what's going on in their society. So yeah, if you go back 100 years ago, people were talking about life like a steam engine. And you go to the modern day and they're all sitting there babbling about, oh, it's like computers and computer life, and yeah, it's all computational, and they're all wrong. So
yeah, that's also how people have been thinking about just the nervous system.
Yeah.
First comparing it to kind of the technology of the time. Every time it's being compared to the current or contemporaneous technology. Steam engine.
Yeah.
Or,
we get overwhelmed by metaphors. And so that, I mean, those are things that we see happening all the time now. That, for instance, Elon Musk and his worries about uh, about our artificial intelligence, the need to go to Mars to escape them. That's just goofy. Okay, he has no idea what artificial intelligence will be like. None of us do. It's highly unlikely that it will be something immediately inimical to all humans. But that's part of the convention. And and H.G. Wells is a good example of that too, where he argues, oh yeah, they would have, that Martians are just like us. They are rapacious colonialists, and they will come to Earth with imperial designs to take us over, which is okay. And then they'll be killed by their own ignorance, which is another nice reflection of modern society. Oh, I'm drifting into the darkness again. Yeah. Oh, yeah, the medieval Machina Mundi, based on clockwork. Yeah, there was a clockwork time. If you look at medieval ideas about how the human body works, there's a lot of stuff about pneumatics and air flowing through tubes and stuff like that, and springs and tension wires. It was, again, metaphors run amok. Comparing human brains to computers is an abstraction. I think a lot of people fail to grasp that. Yep. Yeah, our brains do not work like von Neumann machines at all. And we keep making these mistakes.
I see Neslik brought up there how Mars is different because it doesn't have tectonic plates.
Uh-huh.
And that actually also makes me think of, all these ideas to terraform Mars and Venus. I find these ideas really fascinating. But on the other hand, when I, think more deeply about it, I think, well, there's a reason Mars is a dead barren rock. We could maybe make it livable for, a few thousand years, maybe 100,000 years, maybe 1,000,000 years. But then it's going to return to the state that it's constrained by because of its position and its physical characteristics.
Yeah.
And the same for Venus, its rotation is too slow, and it's maybe too close to the sun, and maybe it's got too much gas,
Yeah, I think that's true of everything. I mean, maintaining a civilization takes effort. You have to constantly work at it, and we could crumble back into cave-dwelling apes.
Yeah,
and but I would think if there was a Martian colony, Martian civilization, it would be focused very differently than ours, and it would be focused on sustaining and maintaining what they've got.
Yeah,
and it would be a very different sort of environment.
It's a very exciting idea to spread life in the solar system, but then again, if you make Mars livable, if humans aren't around anymore, it's gonna go back to what it was.
Yeah.
Personally, I think we should throw some lichens at Mars because there are some experiments that show that lichens can actually survive incredibly enough.
Eliminate this pristine environment.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Maybe.
But I think we should explore it first and find out yeah. Okay, another off-the-wall question. Do you know anything about bird brains, like how they get to be so smart with so little? Well, I know a little bit about them. That they have a very different structure. They have a structure called the Wust. It's there, instead of the expanded cortex we have, they have these other very densely packed regions of their brain that are working in subtly different ways. So there's more than one way to evolve a brain. Yeah. How do they get to be so smart with so little? Well, this is one of the mysteries. There is no good correlation between human brain size and human intelligence. That we've got a lot of wobble here. Here we got this immensely expensive metabolically structure in our heads, and it turns out that different people can, you can have a twofold variation in brain size with no detectable variation in intelligence. So it's really messy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and here you also can see that birds, they are constrained because they need to be as light as possible for being able to fly. So then you got all these strange, interesting adaptations, like how I didn't know about the brain structure, but that's actually very interesting to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're actually a very good model of an alternative high evolved tetrapod. We've got the mammals, and then you got the birds. They're kind of on par in many ways,
Uh-huh.
but they're actually completely different. Birds don't have teeth, or not anymore in any
Yeah.
case, and they've got feathers instead of fur. They're
And when you look at
they're,
them,
they're actually related, because a lot of these things are parallel evolution, because they're
right.
derived from the same thing,
Yeah,
basically.
and bird neurons are on average somewhat smaller than our neurons, so they can pack more in there.
Oh yeah.
That was another discovery, that when they looked at humans, that humans with smaller brain sizes also had slightly smaller neuron sizes. They were more compact to compensate. So it's like there's some sort of allometric law that is maintaining neuron density or something. I don't know. Speaking of which, I recently measured my hat size and discovered that I'm an XL. I don't know what that means, but it it just says I have a big fat head, but it doesn't mean I'm more intelligent than anyone else. Okay, what evidence do we have on observing new genes? Because we haven't seen it create a whole new. Yes, we have. We've seen, there are these things called orphans, these open reading frames that we find in scans of DNA, and there are some new genes that are present in us and aren't present in our other ancestors. The question is whether they're functional, whether they do anything significant, and that's not clear. But yeah, simple genetic processes do generate new genes. And as I always bring up when somebody asks this, what about nylonase? Bacteria that made an enzyme that can digest nylon, and they made it from a little scrap of junk DNA that was expressed and just happened to have weak binding properties to nylon precursors.
Yeah, there are
Yeah.
actually a lot of random proteins that do something very weakly, but
Yeah. I am asked what is the name of that region of the brain again. Let me check this spelling. Oh, okay. That region of the bird brain is called the hyperpaleum, and it's also called the Wulst, Wulst. And I'm just looking at a definition. It is a target of the ascending thalamofugal visual pathway. Okay. It's a destination for lemnothalamic projections in birds. Does that help? Doesn't help me much, but okay.
talking about tiny brains, what about insects? They're really, really small. They've got a very small
Yeah.
bag of neurons, and their behavior is actually, well, pretty complex. Maybe not mammal level
Yeah.
complex, but still, if you look at ants, how many things they can do, and how they respond as a collective.
And it's also interesting because, we were talking earlier about distributed brains and ganglionic systems, and that's what insects have. But at the same time, when you look at insects, what you see is a trend for tagmosis, where ganglia fuse to make a larger mass. So Drosophila, for instance, has this massive this massive thoracic ganglion and a smaller brain cerebral ganglion. So we also see distributed nervous systems becoming more condensed, and yeah, it's complicated. Cartomancer, I didn't mention a hat. I mentioned a hat size. Come on. Do I have any speculations about the energy source of an alien ecosystem? Ours is photosynthesis. There are others like hydrothermal and deep ocean. Yeah, that's go read Bill Martin and Nick Lane. They're all about proton gradients. Wherever you can get a generate a proton gradient by any mechanism, that's what mitochondria do. That's what chloroplasts do. That's what bacteria do. It's just how you make an energy source, and anything that allows you to do that could be a potential source for metabolism in life. Okay, let's see. The term bird brain is sort of a misnomer. Yes, it is. Birds are pretty smart. Some birds, at least. Just like some mammals are pretty smart and others are not. Let's see. Junk DNA is not junk. It is always atheist argument have functions. Not. Why? Okay, this guy's not making much sense. Yeah, junk DNA is junk. There's whole categories of your genome that don't have a functional role in your biology. They just happen to be there. They've accumulated, as I was saying at the beginning, it's a historical contingency sort of argument. They've sort of accumulated by chance. They don't do any particular harm, so they just sort of, it's cheaper just to leave them alone there than try to excise them. Okay. One interesting speculation I have seen is life extracting energy from strong fluctuations in the magnetic field, essentially making the ecosystem a giant dynamo. Yeah, that would be interesting. I'd like to see that. I wonder if that could be, for instance, those Jovian gas bags. Maybe that's how they're generating energy is because there are some pretty intense magnetic fluxes in the atmosphere of Jupiter. So you could imagine tapping into that. Let's see.
Intelligent mollusks, I'd say.
You're trying to turn me on now. What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, mollusks. Yeah, some mollusks. I mean, there's something like snails, not very smart. Okay. But yeah, you look at cephalopods, and there's an interesting thing to think about there, is that intelligence is a product of necessity. That here you've got this organism that has all these manipulating appendages. And what happens? They start using them creatively in different ways, just by selecting for better and better brains to control these sorts of things. So you could make a wild ass guess that maybe what drove the evolution of human intelligence was standing upright and having manipulatory appendages. So they're suddenly interacting with the environment in more complex ways, which drives the evolution of intelligence. Yeah, it's a little bit on the fringe. There's a guy named William Calvin who promoted this idea that the human brain evolved larger and larger sizes just as part of computational redundancy. That what was driving selection for a larger brain was throwing. That in order to throw accurately, you have to calculate, unconsciously calculate trajectories. And it's helpful to have large arrays of neurons that can just process the heck out of that and come to an answer pretty quickly. And so we just got this expansion of the brain for that purpose. And it just accidentally brought along all these other crazy ideas like language and tool use and religion and science. So it's all a byproduct of being better at throwing rocks. Have we tested whether junk DNA is completely junk? One way to do this might be take some bacterium whose genome contains junk DNA and remove it. Has this been done before? Sort of. So bacteria don't have a lot of junk DNA. They have some, but not very much. It's kind of a hallmark of their genomes that they're very compressed and efficient. So it'd be hard to do in a bacterium. But we can do things, again, this is not conclusive, but it's kind of interesting. You can go in and do massive deletions in, for instance, mouse genomes and remove big chunks of DNA, and you never get a phenotype out of it. So it's sort of suggestive. And I say it's not conclusive because you can also knock out functional genes, and there's enough redundancy that you don't get a phenotypic effect either. So that's one thing. But another one is fugu is a pretty good example of that. Fugu has a genome that's 1/8 the size of ours, but it has a few more genes than we do. And what has happened is apparently some point in their evolutionary history, their enzymes went amok and sort of stripped out a lot of junk DNA and cleaned out a lot of that. So they've actually lost junk DNA, and yet they're still fully functional organisms. Let's see. Stephen Miller's human suit is newer than Steve Bannon's. Hasn't started disintegrating yet. Okay, I could expect. Kind of expect that. You don't want him to take that suit off though, because it's just rot and decay on the inside. Oh yeah, we got the creationists going nuts. So junk DNA has a role to holding the genome together. That's not really a very good hypothesis. Okay, you're just sort of arguing that our genes are duct taped together by this crap. That doesn't say much about the specific utility of junk DNA. What's your opinion about the stoned ape hypothesis for the evolution of cognition? I don't know the stoned ape hypothesis. What is it? You'll have to expand. Okay. Perhaps intelligence is an evolutionary step where life is changed to suit the environment with genetic engineering rather than trying to terraform environments to be fit for life. Yeah, okay, sure. Either way, you guys should research what junk DNA is. Sorry, bye. Sorry, I have researched it. Okay. Yeah. He thinks you should research the thing you might understand, and he doesn't. Right back at him. It's unfortunate that even in a niche conversation like this, religion gets thrown into it. I'm an atheist, but here to talk about aliens and evolutionary biology. Okay, ask more questions. I'm happy to talk about it. Okay, the stone ape, McKenna proposed that the transformation from humans' early ancestors Homo erectus to the species Homo sapiens mainly had to do with the addition of the mushrooms psilocybin cubensis in its diet.
Okay. Well, it sounds more plausible than the aquatic ape.
Yeah.
Idea.
Okay, maybe. You know, I'm not going to reject it out of hand because I'm somebody who thinks chance environmental interactions can play a pretty important role in evolution. But I would like to see evidence for this of any kind. Yeah, even something, you know, do you have evidence that early ancestors ate those mushrooms? That they were present in its environment even? Is it more plausible than the Great Green Arkle seizure? Well, no, nothing is more plausible than that.
Is the evolution of a technological species like humans even very likely? I mean, will it happen again if humans went extinct? Would birds? You know, I have actually I have to rant about something. Maybe some of you have seen the dinosauroid.
Hate it. Yeah.
Proposal of, you know, oh, you take a dinosaur, like throw it on, and then you just, you know, you flip its body like it, so it's upright like a human, give it a big head, you know, small snout, just shape a dinosaur into a human form. Then that will be the ultimate evolution of the dinosaurs. Every time I see it, I feel a bit queasy because
it's a common theme though, where what we do is we impose our biases on the subject we're interested in. So yeah, that the ideal form is just like us, of course. So if they're going to progress, as if evolution was a progressive process, then that's what you'll get. And I would say the same thing for technological societies. You know, humans have existed on, you know, Homo sapiens has been around here for 150,000 to 200,000 years. And the kind of technological civilization we have right now has just arisen in the last eye blink of time, and we're not even particularly well adapted for it. So, why would we expect that any other species would do the same thing? It seems extremely unlikely.
Yeah.
I wrote a hypothesis that in order for humans to become this intelligent, there were likely selection pressures for being more intelligent than other humans, and that this pressure was due to politics. Oh, you adaptationist, you. Yeah, I've heard the same sorts of stories. They've been around for ages. Everyone comes up with a new hypothesis to explain a selection force that would drive us to more intelligence. Robert Ardrey's hypothesis was that it was war, competition between humans that was driving our intelligence. Yeah, the aquatic ape, the aquatic environment drove it. And I think it's all bunkum. I am more inclined to favor byproduct hypotheses. One much more interesting one, I think, is that when you do a correlation of our hominid ancestors, just comparing body size and brain size, they correspond. They line up very nicely, rising in the same way for both of them. And so one hypothesis is that our brain size is a byproduct of the allometric function in the construction of our brains combined with a general selection for larger body size, incorporation of new diets to escape predation and all that sort of thing. And something like a cow has a different allometric relationship than a primate. And so selection for larger body size than cows did not produce large brains, but it did in us.
There's also the idea of runaway selection. Did it kind of it came into a feedback loop and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger until.
Yeah, and another one is the sexual selection hypothesis.
All right. Yeah.
That we find intelligent mates stimulating and interesting, and we want to spend more time with them, and we're willing to collaborate to produce children because we like hanging around and telling stories and playing games. I kind of like that one too. Yeah, that's my life.
It's also an opposite to the competition and war idea. Is maybe, well, why would it be competition? Why wouldn't it be cooperation? Social pressures.
What are you, some kind of social justice warrior?
Oh, don't tell you. I've been losing subscribers, but I haven't figured out if that's because of my face reveal or because by association. I don't care.
Oh yeah, it could be. Yeah. Yeah, let's just start reading passages from Kropotkin aloud in these. Do a little dialectic session every week. Sure. Okay, let's see what do we got. Basically the same reason why gods are just like humans, since we imagine other intelligent creatures, even supernatural ones, just as humans. Exactly. That we have limited imaginations, and most of our imagination is focused on human interactions. So when we think about other things, other creatures, we anthropomorphize and personalize them. Okay. Plato was arguing that the human form is the ideal one back in the 4th century BC. Yeah, he seemed to think we had heads with eyes that were able to look up in order to study the stars. Oh, that's cute. Okay. So we shouldn't be talking about Pangloss. We should be talking about Plato.
Oh, Christian Huygens. He was ahead of his time.
What did he say? I know who he is, but
Huygens, Huygens, sorry.
You know better how to pronounce it than I would.
The Dutch astronomer from the 17th century, he speculated on life, sentient life on other planets, and he said, they probably have some kind of hands and eyes, but but then all bets are off. They could look totally different from us.
Right. Okay, Nestle wants to know what made me bring up Star Trek, because he has never watched or hasn't watched much of it. Oh, in Star Trek, they had an episode with the Horta. They found this alien form that was silicon based. And ever since, whenever I talk to lay people or science fiction fans about alien chemistries, yeah, that's the Horta. They remember that. Is it true that macroevolution was never observed? No, it is not true. Macroevolution was observed before micro. Darwin's observations were all about macroevolutionary changes. So yeah, no, it's
Macroevolution was observed before Darwin even.
yeah. So it's like that's a silly canard that creationists don't understand the distinction between micro and macroevolution. So they bring it up as if they think they've made a profound point by saying, "Oh, I believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution." And no, they're basically announcing that they don't understand either one. Another weird pet hypothesis I've seen is a Neanderthal predation hypothesis theory, where one guy says that Neanderthals were this monsters with huge red cat eyes that hunted us and raped women. Oh,
no, that was yeah. You've had it on your blog back then.
oh yeah, that guy.
That guy with the the noseless, fierce
Yeah,
eye Neanderthals.
and of course, really dark skin.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. The thing is, Neanderthals went extinct. So it's like, okay, yeah, go ahead. Let's blame the victims for being monsters now. Yes, to be fair, most of the time when we're speculating on alien life, we're not doing it because we're interested in biology. We're using aliens as a convenient canvas for exploring our own concerns. Yes,
Yeah.
in science fiction, that's the case. In biology, we actually do seriously consider these ideas as ways to extend our understanding of terrestrial biology. So, when you see something, as a scientist, what you want to do is question your assumptions right away and ask, okay, is that the way it is? Is this the way it has to be? What other alternatives are out there? So that's what we do.
There are a lot of interesting TV documentaries from the 90s later there that had consulted a group of scientists to speculate on what life could be on different kinds of planets. I think I forgot the titles, but there's some neat stuff out there.
Yeah. Hello, Scientist Mel.
Yeah.
Glad you could join us.
Hi, Mel.
Yeah. Oh, let's see. Did you see Prometheus? It's awful and breaks biology. Yes, it's terrible. I
didn't see it.
Oh, it's just, oh man, it's really horrible. The only thing I liked about it was the opening scene where the alien drinks the black goop and then breaks apart into single cells and goes into the water supply. I thought that was amusing. Yeah, that's how I think of sexual reproduction, actually. So that was perfect fit.
By the way, there was this other science fiction about some recent movie with cephalopod-like aliens.
Really?
About communication.
Oh, yeah, Arrival.
Arrival,
yeah. Yes, that one was good. It didn't focus on the biology, but it did focus on the alienness and suggest that these aliens would think in radically different ways than we do. That, for instance, they would have very different conception of time. And I thought that was a really good movie. I enjoyed that a great deal. Okay, so Prometheus was bad. The other one that really annoyed me was Avatar. Avatar.
Oh, yeah.
When I saw the planet, I thought, oh, this looks interesting, because they had alien life that had a radically different body plan. Did you notice that all the limbs were bifurcating? So they had a single element here, and then they branched into two elements, then they could branch into more elements. So all of their limbs were these bifurcating structures. I thought, hey, that's a really interesting premise. Why not go with that? And then, of course, they switched to the intelligent aliens who look just like tall, skinny blue people. It was a complete betrayal of evolutionary principles that the aliens should have had branching limbs. I would have been so excited to see that. And that would have been a really interesting potential for intelligent life. I would kind of like to have my arms branch into 4 or 6 or 8 hands, and have digits on the ends of my you could do all kinds of fun things with that, but no, James Cameron came right out and he openly said that because there was a romance story, they had to look like humans, and the woman had to have tits. Okay.
Talk about something that's probably not going to be evolved somewhere else.
Yes, secondary sexual characteristics will not be shared with alien species.
No, even if you just look at all the primates, all the different manifestations of hair and patches and
strange multicolored lumps that swell and
nose, what do they call those? Nose apes.
Yeah.
Nose monkeys.
Yeah. Okay, Avatar did have a hidden conservation message. That's true. And they did have some weird, quirky things that I thought were kind of promising. That, for instance, sex was engaged with their little hair sort of things. So that was one weirdness that they had in there, but that could have been so much weirder. And it would have gotten all the biologists much more excited.
Yeah, they could be like those amphorans I mentioned earlier. Triradial.
Yeah. Okay, Christopher Cas9 mentions that he would have still looked relatively human with just an extra pair of limbs. I agree. And since they were entirely CGI generated, there was no limits on them. It's kind of like the John Carter of Mars movie. Yeah, with the 4-armed green aliens, which I thought were kind of cool. I hate to say it, I actually enjoyed that movie. I thought I would like to see a sequel to that one because it took off in some interesting directions.
Yeah, but it flopped.
It flopped badly. Oh man,
they shouldn't have called it. They shouldn't have called it John Carter. I think it was a marketing mistake on Disney's part. Was it Disney?
Yes, it was Disney. They should have named it like the original, A Princess of Mars, and then, of course, then all the parents would bring their little girls to the Disney Princess movie. that may not have worked out so well. Okay. Yes, in Avatar, we have sex by intertwining our hair, and also on Avatar, we interact with our pets by intertwining our hair. Yeah, there was a hidden bestiality message in Avatar.
Scientist Mel asks about Titan. We kind of covered that already.
Yeah. There's one thing we mentioned earlier is, although it's highly unlikely that we will discover alien life in our lifetimes, the one place is Europa, or possibly Titan, or somewhere. Titan would be much more exotic, but yeah, we gotta go there. We gotta set a big drill to Europa. Okay, Giuliano Taverna says we need a movie featuring aliens that look and act like the horrible gelatinous blob from Futurama. Okay, that relates to something we were talking about earlier, though, about nervous systems. Can you have an intelligent species with a distributed nerve net? And I would argue no. You need some centralization of complex nervous structure somewhere, maybe multiple times, but and it's the gelatinous blob from Dungeons and Dragons, isn't it? I don't know. Oh,
By the way, I have a video
yes.
about slimes.
All right. Okay.
The
Yes.
biology of slimes.
Yes. Fedor has a video about everything. So just go to his channel and look for it. Oh, picking apart Gattaca. Yeah, that's Gattaca's. I have mixed feelings about it. Scientifically, it's total garbage. You're never going to be able to predict traits with that much detail. But politically and socially, I could see that kind of ignorant, racist pseudoscience becoming increasingly prevalent, because that's where we're at right now. We need some kind of centralized nervous system. We knew you were some kind of evil communist. Real Merkians are all rugged individualists. Yeah, okay. Are slimes similar to proto-multicellularity? That's an interesting question. We got a guy on Freethought blogs who writes about Volvox and talks about multicellularity. I had him on a video a while back, so he'd be the guy to talk to. Oh, you're on your way to see Jurassic World. I could give you spoilers because I saw it last night.
No, don't. I have to see it. I have to see it with my kids tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
But we just watched Jurassic Park, and there's no comparison. The original, very first one, it's just directed by Steven Spielberg himself. It holds up really well. But
Yeah, all I'll say about Jurassic World is it's a good thing if you go in with really low expectations.
That's how I watch Star Trek. So
oh yeah,
I turn off my biology and science.
Yeah, you gotta
brain centers, and then just enjoy the human drama.
Yeah. This is a big problem for me in science fiction. My ideal would be a science fiction story that tweaks one or two things and then extrapolates forward, and then I could go along with it. So, for instance, what's its name? Blade Runner. Blade Runner I enjoyed, and scientifically I thought it was okay because it really just has one foundational premise, which is that you can build these robots, and yet when you look in more detail at what the robots are like, they're actually biologically generated artificial organisms modeled on humans. And I thought scientifically that's fine, that's really interesting. It's also interesting because it reflects people's attitudes where they sort of impose boundaries where there aren't necessarily any. So that's kind of my ideal, is something like that. The Martian. I hated The Martian so much. I really did. I did. It just seemed like a succession of happy accidents, all with a fortuitous end for an extremely unlikely conclusion. And that bothered me. It was a bit too Mary Sue for me. Yeah, it broke thermodynamics, and it broke gardening, and the soil stuff.
Yeah, there's also a thing about Martian soil that it contains some kind of very aggressive substances that that reacts with that breaks down organic matter right away.
Yeah,
the Viking, they got these ambivalent results. I forgot the exact chemical name, but so if you put anything organic in the soil, it's going to be eaten alive, eaten right away.
And it so cheapens soil. Soil is amazing stuff. It's got so much organic, so much biological stuff in it. It's It's not real. Soil is not inorganic, and they just kind of glossed over that. Okay. Oh, Nelsie likes Solo. I saw Solo last week, and I kind of liked it too. Again, very low expectations going in, and it was just this nice little one-off science fiction story. And I didn't go in expecting, oh, this is going to be the major plot point for all future novel stories set in this universe. And it's just something that just sort of stands alone, and it was okay. It was.
Yeah, I thought it was entertaining. Yeah, nothing more.
Let's see. Another movie is 2001 movie called Evolution. That sounds like the kind of movie I would turn on, but I don't remember it. It might also be the kind of movie I would turn on, watch 30 seconds of, and turn off. So yeah.
I've seen the posters of that. I think it's gonna the latter group. I think it's kind of silly, like Men in Black.
Oh, okay.
Men in Black was a funny movie, but it was not very scientific at all.
No, that's the other extreme where I can tolerate is that when it just
Yeah,
completely abandons any pretense to science, just says we're just
yeah,
going to have a fun little romp here. Don't worry about it. I can go. It's the ones in between. They're in that uncanny valley between science and fiction, and that's not a good place to be. Okay, most plausible alien in science fiction. Oh, huh. That. Let's see. The ones I found most plausible. Let's see. Bruce, the cyberpunk guy, Bruce Sterling. His schismatic series. One of the
oh,
parts of that story was about these insect-like aliens that lived in space, and that one it actually sounded a lot like what you'd expect, where where intelligence isn't the premium, and where you adapt or you die, and that one I thought was pretty plausible. So that was good. Let's see what else was I think. Oh, CJ Cherry. CJ Cherry writes some really interesting stuff. She's got an anthropology background. A lot of her stories are too humanoid to be realistically alien. Most of her aliens are very human-like, but that's okay because she makes them culturally different, and so that it's exploring that human-human interaction stuff again with very different alien societies coming together, and I kind of like that. But she also wrote one, and I cannot for the life of me remember the name, but she wrote one where she said, I'm going to make this a really alien, and it was, and it was I'm racking my brains trying to remember the name of it. I think it had night in the title. Anyway, it was about a human encounter with an alien who was just so completely different that there was no point of connection between the two of them, and it turned into kind of a horror story as I was reading it because they could not interact at all. But it was a fun exploration of an idea. I don't think it was one of her more popular books though, so she hasn't returned to that theme. Person with Mel says the blob is plausible. I don't
well,
know.
how do you retain coherence of that huge body? Can be
Yeah.
split off in all kinds of parts, like a slime mold.
Yeah, and Elsie's the ones who lived in the ones who lived in an asteroid. That's one group I was thinking of from Bruce Sterling. Yeah, I don't know if I find the blob plausible. Again, it's got that chemical implausibility that being able to grow that large and just expand so rapidly, and dissolve everything. No, that doesn't work. I just don't see.
How do you move such a big mass around and keep it together? That.
Yeah, what's the source of its motivation? I mean, it's very amoeboid, and amoeboid things are just kind of crawling around, consuming whatever they encounter. But the blob is much, much bigger. I don't know how it can hold itself together. That's a problem. And another problem is the aliens in in the Alien movies with their amazing magical blood that dissolves everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't swallow that. That's too unlikely. There was a really great Adult Swim short, what was it, Robot Chicken, about that, where an alien gets damaged and he starts bleeding, and it eats through the floor, and he falls through the floor, the next floor, then the next floor, the next floor, the next floor, etc. He finally falls onto a planet. His blood is all oozing and bubbling and steaming everywhere, and they put him on a stretcher to carry him into an ambulance. He eats through that and it falls. They finally throw him into the ambulance. He eats through the ambulance. Ambulance explodes. That's what would happen, I think, in that kind of story.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. What's your opinion about the xenomorph and alien? That's what I was just talking about. I don't. Oh, with Sigourney Weaver, Paling Ripley.
I think playing.
Oh, with Sigourney. Yeah, Sigourney Weaver was great. I really liked her performance there. The alien is just too much. Also, the fact that their alien has this weird thing where it eats things and consumes their DNA and then incorporates that DNA, and the next generation has some of the. Yeah, no.
No, how would it even work?
I know. How could you have something that's partially human with acid blood?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what would be, how would the genetics work? Why would it? If we know anything from our life forms, that there's all these repair mechanisms that are supposed to keep DNA, our genes, the same, do not change. Life doesn't really want to change itself, usually, in any case.
Yeah,
so why does it want to experiment?
And it's incorporating too many contradictory features.
Yeah.
It's like Mr. Spock having green blood and two hearts and being half human. No, you can't do that. Those are incompatible. Okay, and Scientist Mel brings up Signs. Oh no, I didn't like Signs at all.
Is it Mel Gibson?
Yeah, that's one where the aliens come to conquer Earth, and then they discover that they don't like water. Yeah. I'm a Pacific Northwest boy at heart, and so I love places with lots and lots of rain. I wish it would rain more here. So that also made me angry with that movie. Okay. Voyager in the Night. Yes, the C.J. Cherry book. Voyager in the Night. That's the one. It's probably been 20 years since I read it, but yeah, I thought it was pretty good.
Well, initially brings up the good point that a parasite like the xenomorph, why would it parasitize on creatures that it has never encountered before?
Right.
Parasites, they're very specific to their host usually, in any case.
Yep.
It takes a lot of adaptation.
Yeah, I mean this isn't a classification issue. I don't think Aliens is a science fiction movie at all. Even though the director thinks it is, it's a horror movie. It's a very good horror movie, and that's what we ought to watch it as, and try not to learn science lessons from it for sure. Oh, thank you, Scientist Mel. Spock didn't have two hearts. That was the doctor. Oh, okay. They did have green blood, though. I thought they had some other funny things.
But then Klingons have two backbones or something. Klingons had two backbones. Something weird like that.
And yeah, This is the terrible thing. If I were suddenly to be transported to the Star Trek University, I would be whipping out a scalpel and dissecting everything in sight, because I want to figure this stuff out.
And they're all supposed to be descended, or not descended, from a human proto-humanoid that was spread around the galaxy. Or no, they spread the genes and they kept dormant in the junk DNA.
Yeah, there's
it gave directed evolution. It's not very scientific.
Yeah. You know, I just noticed we've been talking for over 2 hours.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we should probably wrap this up. Just cause. Yeah, because we can do it again some other time too. So let's see. I'll just sum up. What was I talking about? We were talking about now I've completely forgotten aliens and body plans. Yeah.
Didn't talk body plans very much.
Yeah, we kind of wandered far off topic all over the place, but that's okay. So so my conclusion is body plans are a fundamental concept. There's nothing fixed about them except by history. And so if you've got aliens who do not share a history with us, they're not going to share a body plan with us. So my conclusion is aliens are not going to look like Klingons. They're going to be even less closely related to us than ctenophores are. So yeah, we gotta look at them in a more imaginative way if we want to be realistic. And then I will turn it over to Phrenomythic for the last word.
All right. Yeah, well, I agree. We have no life is constrained by its evolutionary history. So we have no idea what's going to be on the other planets. We can speculate all we want, but until we finally find it out there, then, which is actually kind of self-defeating for me to say, because I've got a video series I'm planning to do on speculating on what we may infer from life on Earth about life on other planets. So, okay, well, maybe not write it completely off, but yeah, I'm going to do some more thinking about it.
So clearly the answer is we have to go. Let's go to Europa. Let's go to Mars. Let's send biologists there. Let's figure this stuff out.
This century, please.
Okay. Yes, before I'm dead, because I want the answer.
Yeah.
Which means you're going to have to work pretty fast. Okay. Well, thanks for joining me, Fedor.
Yeah.
And thanks all the people in chat. We had a good conversation.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh yeah, I will do something else next week. We'll see what we'll talk about. Okay, maybe I'm going to have to talk about junk DNA. I don't know. Okay, talk to you later. Good night, good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.